Well, I'll just say welcome to everyone. And as we always say, this is an autistic / neuroholographic space where different ways of being are most welcome. And we welcome our allies to be with us with a caveat that autistic voices are first. And yes, everyone answer or ask questions at the end. Apparently, Julia has a long presentation and has left, and we'll probably stay over the hour, which is beautiful. We do that all the time. And she's got her own jam going on, and she's become part of the family here. So I'm just gonna turn it right over to Julia. Thank you for being here today.
Great, thanks, Dawn and Roger and Morgan, who are all supporting this amazing community that I've just discovered. It's one of these amazing things about being autistic is, I don't know if it's all autistic people, but a lot of autistic people I've discovered are very open to connection, and Dawn is one of them, and asked me to do this, which is amazing. So I'm going to share my screen. Because I don't know about you all, but I have audio processing issues. So I figured it would be nice to be able to read along. So I'm going to do that now to make sure you can see the beginning of it. There you go. Can everyone see it okay? All right, great. So this is basically, I just want to quickly say, actually, no, you know what? It's in the present. I've got it all in the preface. So I wrote the preface because I was so nervous. I didn't think I could wing it. So I'm just going to go with it. It's going to be like about 50 minutes long. No shit. Then there'll be time afterwards. I'll stay for like a half hour after if anyone has questions. Also, if it's just a lot and you want to see it in print, if you're willing to take it and not show it to anyone else, I'll send you the text. Okay. So this is from my memoir, It Saves Your Life, Notes on Late Diagnosed Autism, Ableism, and Awe. I'll be reading from chapter 5 of my memoir, which is still in progress, but relates to what DJ Savarese presented 2 weeks ago. So decided to take the risk of sharing ideas that I'm still distilling rather than perform a finished product. Even as a theater kid, I preferred rehearsals over performances and love to hear people's work and research and processes of becoming. So I've decided this is part of my unmasking process as someone only diagnosed at 57 3 years ago. My desire with this researched memoir is to create an unmasked autistic text. So let's see how it goes. However, since this is the 5th chapter, I need to give you a little contextual info and an image that is relevant beforehand. Chapter 5 follows a chapter in which I end discussing my suspicion that my biological father, who I did not know well, but always had an uncanny understanding of, even when we were sitting in awkward silence, was autistic. Chapter 2 includes a timeline because I moved many times and had multiple step parents and living arrangements that not even therapists can keep track of, alongside a parallel timeline of autism misdiagnoses and mistreatments during my lifetime, and a few unexpected bright spots, about which more in this chapter. By chapter 5, you would know a lot of details of my traumatic childhood, TM, about which one particular incident is relevant here. In 1974, when 10 years old, I lived for a few months with a caretaker named Mrs. Levine, who suffered a weeks-long psychotic break, which led to her believing I was evil and trying to kill her with knives she herself was wielding and hiding around the house. My trauma therapist, who I saw for years in London before knowing I was autistic, never understood how I survived this without, quote, turning, meaning losing my mind as well. In the midst of my autism diagnostic process, which spanned from March 2020 to April 2021 because of pandemia and Spectrum Services not having a protocol to diagnose virtually, I realized being autistic actually saved me while living with Mrs. Levine, because I knew how to mask, read her moods, thanks to hyper empathy and hypervigilance, and play dead until the day my stepfather David was able to save me and get her to open the door behind which she had barricaded us behind furniture she had secured with twine. This is a long story that has more space in the memoir, but I did begin a diary 2 weeks later that began with this image, which is important to what follows. So this is a little thing I drew. Says the world will never be the same, but more the image is more what's important there. Okay, you'll see it again. So chapter 5, Arrival Mountain Time, the understory. And the numbered quotes here are all from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which is the sort of aphoristic guide to yoga philosophy. That's another part of the memoir, but they go throughout. 2.18. What awareness regards, namely the phenomenal world, embodies the qualities of luminosity, activity, and inertia. It includes oneself, composed of both elements and the senses, and it is the ground for both sensual experience and liberation. Arrival Mountain Time, May 18th, 2023. Arrival, time to arrive. I'm sitting on a porch in Virginia looking over bluffs below, which lead to the James River and railroad tracks, neither of which I can see, but can hear the rushing river in night's quiet and the trains when they go by. Across the river are the Blue Ridge Mountains, I think. We're also in the Appalachian foothills, but here is what I do know. There's a tree with small white blossoms next to the porch that is so sweet it's enough to intoxicate. A large hawk flew overhead, majestic wings out, slowly circling, almost like a greeting. Maybe it was an eagle. I can hear a car from an unseen road, which must also be below. The sweet scent is amazing. And now that I'm tuning into it beyond the songs of different birds, all of whom are unseen, I can hear the James River roaring past. The leaves are rustling softly in the gentle breeze, each breeze bringing in the sweet smell. A few moments ago, a large butterfly. The cushion for the lounge chair on the porch is leaning against its frame, dripping dry. It rained before I arrived. I've never been in rural Virginia before. A red cardinal just darted by on a mission from the bird gods. Crickets, or are they cicadas? I'm having to arrive slowly because I injured my foot a few days ago. I want to go racing about and see the river, walk the paths, see the main house. I'm in the small cabin a few yards away, visible but separate, a familiar stance. Instead, I'm sitting here on the porch, foot in brace, arriving, waiting for the cushion to dry off from the rain so I can sit on the lounge chair that made me think last night, right before my ass got soaked with water seeping up from the drenched foam, I'm never going to leave. I can smell my coffee now and going to get it. The nurse practitioner that saw my foot, known sprained, discovered fractured, says, move it, move it. I did. I got all the way here from New York City, but today I know I need to rest it. I put on the brace, allowing my foot to have an assist. Sometimes it's not about move, 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 but instead still, still, still. 2.19. All orders of being, undifferentiated, differentiated, indistinct, distinct, are manifestations of the fundamental qualities of nature. Time to arrive. Notice the new bugs of all descriptions, some of them pretty, some of them ants, whatever. Hear the various birds' chirrups and whirps and whoops and warbles and whistles. Notice by looking more carefully the varieties of small blooms on trees and shrubs, the gentle path leading somewhere magical seeming that you want to lope off into, but might have to wait until tomorrow. The weather is low 60s, your favorite, not too warm, not too cold, perfect to sit outside on the porch, feet up on another chair, listening, smelling, looking, arriving. Last night, as my host Trudy drove us back from the Food Lion, one of those giant strip mall grocery stores with wide aisles filled with mostly food you'd never eat, but lots of it, and hidden away in corners that take you ages to find the food you do want, fresh veggies and frozen, ground flaxseed meal, Greek yogurt, good tea, that kind of thing, and a few things from the tiny gluten-free section. I brought my own coffee maker and grinder. I never leave the important things to chance. Also my own pillow, same. After that, by which time my poor foot was deeply unhappy with me, as we're driving into more and more rural countryside, smaller roads, less houses, more trees and hills and mountains dotting the skyline, a fawn appears in the road. Trudy slows down and the fawn lopes along beside us for a few minutes, a little bit ahead on the embankment, as if she is guiding us somewhere. Then she finally does leap over a hedge of some sort into the forest. I said to Trudy, wow, that was like a greeting. She said, yes, they usually just dash away quickly. It reminds me of the seals on Westray, I say quietly. It's a good omen for your stay, Trudy concludes. I'm going to skip a bit. She broke her foot 2 weeks ago, so while I'm teetering about in a brace, she's tottering along in a boot. But somehow we bumbled along, an accidental comedy duo, rolling my luggage up the grassy rise to the cottage in a wheelbarrow, and here I am now, in the cottage separate from the main house. To be apart was my decision. And when I found myself singing out loud to myself last night, I knew why. I live in a small apartment in New York City with my husband. I never sing loudly to myself. I'd feel too self-conscious. Here, my voice rises and falls, humming sound songs I hear from somewhere. It reminds me of walking around in a cold, decommissioned chapel in Colchester one July, humming and hearing deep throat sounds emerge from me I did not know I could make, and realizing I needed to perform them in a piece I was creating, knowing it would seem really weird coming from me, a small white American woman in the UK making strange Mongolian throat singing like sounds from where? I don't know. They just came out of my mouth unbidden. When my Colombian friend Luis came to the performance and heard the singing echoing inside an old red Routemaster bus parked on a hillside where heretic Quakers had been killed for their beliefs, he said afterwards, "You have some indigenous in you." I knew he was right, but indigenous to where? Perhaps Scotland, some ancient race of people, the ones who erected those giant standing stones on Orkney. No one knows what they're originally for. The theories change every few decades, shedding more light on contemporary biases than the unknowable past. But when I saw a white British colleague during one performance, he seemed alarmed, and there I was in 2008 at 45 years old, exposed again as what? I had no idea. But somehow, once again, the familiar tune, wrong, too much, definitely too weird, maybe even a little scary. Last night, looking over at the small windows of the cozy seeming yellow lit bedrooms in the main house from the picture windows in the cabin, I remembered looking out from the glass porch doors of my Nana and Papa's house in Cape Cod to the backyard of the Terrios through a few scrubby pine trees that separated our yard from their larger, more capacious and overgrown affair, suitable for the 8 or so kids of the family. In the 1970s, these very large Catholic families were more common than now. I always envied them. My stepmother, Gloria, had a big Italian family like that, all the kids running around unself-conscious in underwear or whatever, jumping into wading pools or above ground pools, nothing fancy or expensive. Lots of plastic covering everything, loud colors, loud people, lots of desserts and pasta, big cars. And me, the incredibly self-conscious only child, no idea how to relate, looking at them wide-eyed, wanting nothing more but to join in butt pinned to the spot, unable to move, ignored mostly by the other kids because they could not recognize me as one of them any more than I could. I don't think they were malicious or bullying. I just didn't factor. And so last night here in Virginia, some part of me felt left out. The little kid looking out the window, the little kid who the Terrio sent some kid as messenger to ask if I wanted to play. And either I said no or Nana said no. Somehow the answer was no. I did not go. This was right after the whole Mrs. Levine ordeal. I had just turned 11 and staying in the living room on my Nana and Papa's fold-out sofa. My father had not sent for me from California. I had no bravery left in me and no illusion I could fit in with other kids. So my desire to be alone so much, is it mine? Is it a trauma response? Is it just wanting to be able to sing out loud without anyone declaring for it, positively or negatively? That time in Colchester, Lal Coxall was playing his soprano sax along with me. He'd been happy to be part of this strange endeavor. He was a well-known experimental jazz musician in his 70s, but his wild flights of noise had fallen out of favor. When he heard my vocals, he asked, "Do you have any albums?" I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I felt oddly ashamed, like, wait, what? Am I supposed to have albums? Is this yet another thing I've done wrong in my life? Not nurturing my voice? When a collaborator that year tried to record video of me singing on the cliffs of the Western Walk overlooking the Atlantic on Westray as a bright orange-red ball of sun was setting, I just froze when she said, "Okay, can you do it again?" "No," I said, mortally offended. "It's sacred. I can't just repeat it." And I never sang like that again until last night here, alone in a cottage, far enough away from anyone else. I felt secure no one could hear me. Maybe they could, I don't know, but I didn't think so. The eagle or hawk is back, circling above. That sweet smell. A car in the distance, some voices earlier, steps to a car and car door closing, and it drives away on the gravel. 2.20, pure awareness is just seeing itself. Though pure, it usually appears to operate through the perceiving mind. 2.21, in essence, the phenomenal world exists to reveal this truth. The next day, a meditation on trees and their shapes, how they bend, the leaves dance, the shapes, while all different, the leaves do come off of branches and stems, lichen on bark, some curve gracefully, the sweet smell of the white blossoms, which will be what I remember most. Someday, somewhere else, I'll smell this scent and remember this porch and writing these words, or maybe not. Maybe I'll think, oh, that smell, it reminds me of something somewhere, what was it? And maybe it'll come back. the towel quivering in the breeze that I hung over the porch railing, the days it takes the lounge cushion to dry after a downpour, the ridge I can see through a small break in the trees, the mountains, or were they foothills? The tree, the central trunk with its limbs, branches, stems with leaves reaching out is the visible part. Not only is there an overstory, though, there is an understory. In the slope next to the porch where I hobbled over to see yesterday, I saw the roots of a tree connecting a few yards away to another tree. So perhaps it's not as Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari wrote, that the arborescent is in contrast to the rhizomatic tubers underground and interconnected, but instead the trees contain the rhizomatic as well. In Inwood Hill Park, the trees that have been felled by recent hurricanes, their trunks have whole worlds growing inside them. Nature does indeed seem to abhor a vacuum, always growing where there may be an absence or a tear in the fabric of the nameable. A red, hard, heavy thought may not be where we habitually locate thought, but isn't that, as William James argues, more about habit than about thought itself? Because what else is red and heavy and hard than evaluation, a re-evaluation of experience worlding? What else is it but the mesh of experience interwoven with a rhizomatic warp like the roots of well-established weeds circulating underground? What else is it but the impossibility of finding the beginning or end of the woven understory that produces the apex we have taken to be the establishing shot of life captured? Which is a quote from Erin Manning in her forthcoming book, Being of Relation, that she gave me permission to quote. Yay, Erin. And she's quoting Red Heart Heavy Thought, Adam Wolfond, who I'll talk about in a minute. June 7th, 2023. A few weeks later, I'm sitting in my office meditation reading chair in New York City, and I'm stuck. The air outside is apocalyptic orange because of the wildflower fires burning in remote forests in Quebec that no one can even reach to put out. A new air purifier whirs in the living room, and I have on a mask inside. I have had to use an inhaler for the first time since having COVID in March 2020, and my lungs once again feel like broken glass. I'm also feeling buried under the weight of the traumatic timeline of autism, which I was researching in Virginia. I do not know how to write about this red, hard, heavy thought that seems to be crushing me. I'm wondering, excuse me, partly because of what I wrote when in Virginia a couple weeks ago about Deleuze and Guattari and the rhizomatic, if Guattari ever had autistic patients at Laborde, the experimental psychiatric clinic in France, where he practiced in the 1950s to 80s. The philosophical books he co-authored with Deleuze, Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus, were foundational in terms of how I framed the theatrical experiments in my labs in New York and London. And their writing helped me articulate the written part of my practice-based doctoral thesis, arguing theater could be framed as an act of philosophy. The rhizomatic is one of their key concepts because of the way that roots and tubers that connect underground and sprout up as wild flora, aka weeds, and continue to grow and connect even when not visible, are a more interesting and resilient model, rather than mind, body politic, and art and writing function more than the common model, which they frame as arborescent, a tree with limbs, which evokes relations and lineages that are more linear and hierarchical, but when chopped down is dead. While the rhizomatic and arborescent clearly relate to each other in nature with no hard distinction between the two, the concept of rhizomatic structure has taken root in a lot of literary, artistic, and psychological theory as a way to refer to structures that function outside of normative linear expectations. Had I written about rhizomes seemingly out of the blue because there might be some link between autism and Deleuze and Guattari's theories? Googling Guattari and autism, the first name to pop up was Fernand Delini. Guattari had invited him to live and work at Laborde in the mid-1960s after Delini had left yet another institution he felt was too restrictive as he tried to deinstitutionalize so-called problem youth. But after 2 years, Delini found even Laborde too ideologically based, so he went off to the Cevennes Mountains to a rough encampment at Monoblet, where he brought a nonverbal autistic boy, Jean-Marie, whom he had adopted. He invited a few other kids to stay year-round and more, the majority, who stayed during holidays. Monoblet was originally an encampment that Guattari and his communist comrades used as a meeting place, so it had a history as a home to a radical network. Delini conceived of a network similar to the same way Deleuze and Guattari conceptualized the rhizomatic. Delaney titled his collection of writings The Arachnean because he found in spiders and their webs a way of being that was most akin to his concept of a network, that which can be created, destroyed, and rewoven elsewhere as necessity dictates. The idea is not to create institutional permanence, but allow for open spaces where a network like a spider's web can weave itself. Even as radical as the anti-psychiatric practices of Laborde were, Delaney was done with language, sort of. He wrote a lot about being done with language. So he wanted somewhere that non-speaking autistic kids could be themselves, accompanied in their activities by adults with a light touch, not in view of curing them. Instead, he wanted to show the humans that we are, who use words so wantonly, that there's another way to live. Soon after establishing the encampments, the adult volunteers who accompanied the children during their rounds of basic chores, the adults did the chores and the kids sometimes helped, but their participation was not enforced. When a child appeared to be harming themselves or acting in a way that seemed to make no sense, felt the need to name this behavior something, which led to pathologizing language immediately. Delaney devised a plan for a new way to communicate between the adults and children. He noticed the kids drew a lot, mostly circles and curves, repetitively and automatically. So he suggested that the network of adults begin tracing the movements of the kids throughout the encampment and trace the places they detoured and returned to and use visual symbols for certain movements, like moving their hands, twirling, rocking, and the like. The adults first drew their own movements and the structure of the encampment itself. These, quote, customary lines were marked on regular paper, while the children's various movements each day were on tracing paper superimposed onto one another. In this way, Delaney and the network could see what he would refer to as the kids' detours and wander lines become visible. He called these tracings a visual commons, in which the two worlds of verbal adults and nonverbal children could relate without forcing one to become the object of the other, a way to connect rather than interpolate. And these are two of the drawings from 1974. So you can sort of see the thing. They're really beautiful. I'll tell you how to find more later. Deleuze and Guattari, upon seeing these drawings and hearing of the kids' wander lines in relation to customary lines, were inspired to create the concept of lines of flight and the relation of these detours to the customary and the medial lines as the rhizome. In comparing Delaney's project to Deleuze and Guattari's ideas, current scholar Anya Komar proposes Delaney's maps not only put Deleuze and Guattari's thinking into practice, but develop it further into what Delaney calls the common, le commune. Delaney's practice is more compelling in its project of overcoming the master signifier and therefore the right of one person to dominate the other. His method advanced Deleuze and Guattari's theories of connection between formal and political potential of the line. Instead of interfering with the other, his method focused on changing oneself. Sometimes, this is his quote, Delaney, sometimes one or another of us would go with that kid there right into the water. He wouldn't go into the water he watched. And this made us think, since there was no other to him, what could we do to make ourselves water to his eyes? As I was burrowing down this research rabbit hole, I discovered philosopher artist Erin Manning, who was also writing about Delaney and Deleuze and Guattari in relation to her concept of autistic perception, which is the way that many autistic people experience the world, in which many of us do not or cannot filter out sensations and experiences to make discrete events line up in a certain way like neurotypicals do. She does not pathologize this experience, but sees how we can be immersed in becoming so that we can perceive the world worlding rather than the static nature of reality most people experience. She believes anyone can experience this level of perception in some immersive states like creative flow, for example, but that this is the base camp for most autistics. I decided to try to connect with her by sending a private message on Facebook, that strange multifaceted network of both connection and alienation, which has helped me find so many autistic people that I can't be as cynical about it as I would like. And she accepted my friend request that day. We then began an ongoing correspondence that has been extraordinary in illuminating how so much of the artistic and academic work I've been doing for years related to her concept of autistic perception. She also confirmed my experience of how disabling those same worlds can be to autists, especially navigating all the politics that would have helped build more of a coherent career. She told me she began writing about autistic perception years before she realized she too was autistic. Manning lives in Quebec, only 45 kilometers from the burning forest that were choking us in New York. but the air was clear in Canada. The winds were blowing the ash above them and south to us, which had created an atmospheric vortex that was trapping the ash to create our own little apocalyptic thunderdome. As we messaged back and forth, I sent her photos of the orange skies. She lives now in the countryside, creating a sustainable ecosystem in which to live and host other thinkers and artists. If we had met and I had discovered I was autistic years ago, would I have ended up in Canada living with the goats and the maple trees, doing postdoctoral research on rhizomatic autistic culture? My Canadian husband moved to New York City to live with me. Should I have instead moved north? He reminded me he had tried once to connect me with Aaron's project a few years earlier, which for some reason I did not follow up. This was before my diagnosis. But here we were connecting now, something about the atmosphere, the way the winds decided to blow, the way the water flows. 1974, 2024. To respect the autistic being is not to respect the being that he or she would be as other. It is to do what is needed so the network can weave itself. Delaney, of course. So here's those drawings again. All right. So above on the left is a photo of the opening of my diary on February 12th, 1974, that I showed you earlier, 2 weeks after the Mrs. Levine episode. On the right are the tracing of the kids' movements drawn by Delaney's network in May and June 1974. I was 10 years old and the French kids were aged 8 to 13. While I have been looking at the Delaney network drawings for months, I had not ever put them alongside my own and recognized their uncanny similarity, nor connected the dots until a few days ago. That, alongside this Delaney quote, made me cry. Delaney, whose tracing method was inspired by the abstract lines made by Jamari, said, "A child's drawing is not a work of art. It's a call for new circumstances." Lines of flight? Yes. As a child, when I made this drawing, was I seeing something in advance of what I could see, expressing something in advance of what I could understand? Across the ocean in France, at the same time, there is this man caring for these children who could not speak, who are considered not only autistic at that time, but also psychotic, but he doesn't think they have problems. He's not asking them to change. He's learning from them. Is he perfect? No. Did he make some erroneous conclusions? Absolutely. But was he decades ahead of his time, his work providing a glimmer of light within the sheer density and weight of the red, hard, heavy thought of the autistic timeline in the Anglo-Saxon world? Yes, 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 yes. Damien Milton, an autistic researcher in the UK, drawing from Deleuze and Guattari's notion of the rhizome in his awareness of how their concepts were influenced by Delaney, has described how autistic identity may be shaped by what he refers to as rhizomatic memory, that is, memory in which connections may be seemingly random and nonlinear. Milton highlights the concept of an ethnography through which constructions of self and identity may follow a more fragmented and rhizomatic model of becoming. This accords with my life experience and my own artistic tendencies. I never decided my work should be experimental, but it is always manifest this way, because these rhizomatic structures on the page or in performance are how I've always perceived and experienced the world. Within writing and theater, I felt the freedom to allow this perception to become visible, even when criticized for it. I felt much less freedom in my own life, but I think my artistic vision gave me enough space to breathe to survive until now, and I can finally truly take a walk outside. So where did those lines of flight, those wander lines, those detours take me, the ones perhaps intuited in my drawing in 1974? While varying in intensity and scope, all the detours have been motivated by a need to move out of a situation that feels stagnant, suffocating, or false. Delaney discovered even the tracings of the children's wanderlines began to stop creating something new. That was after many years, but still. The drive to get out of something, anything that becomes revealed to be a construct was strong in us both. Colleagues of Delaney believed he too was autistic, though of the hyperlexic variety, like me. One who uses endless words to describe those who are silent, whose response to these kids was not to see a problem with them, but a failing, and who hurl words at the wordless abyss. He decided at 84, he died in 84 in 1996, so the concept of an autism spectrum would have been new, and I doubt he would have embraced that label or any label. But I mention it because I've noted this tendency in many autistic people to throw over old concepts for new ones, to not stop at easy solutions. This defies the whole stereotype of autistics loving routines and hating change, etc. But then again, most actual autistic experience defies the cliches. Not surprisingly, since those stereotypes are generated by holistic researchers looking at our behavior from the outside and not understanding what they're seeing, like at all. The idea we have no self-awareness, another common misperception, renders our own descriptions of experience invalid, a neat rhetorical trick to ensure autistics never have a voice, even those of us who have the gall to write. My own routines emerge from the need to rationalize a world that is coming at me at 11 all the time. Autistic synapses don't prune, so we have access to all the sensory experience all the time. And I've developed routines so I don't have to make small decisions throughout the day with all the sensation and all the millions of options of ways of seeing overwhelmingly. It's a strategy to just get through a day. But I don't think of it as sacrosanct, more like a necessity for basic survival. These routines can and do change when needed, especially after a detour once again becomes necessary. Permission to create detours artistically was something I saw adults give themselves back in the early 1970s when living with my various parents. Even during this obviously traumatic timeline, there existed even here an understory and an important one. The few times I did see Jim, my father, who lived in New Haven when I lived with Robin, my mother, and David, stepfather in Waterford, he would bring me to the Natural History Museum, which I loved, the dinosaurs and also the gemstones. Every time I'd ask to buy a pencil with a long, clear plastic handle filled with little gemstones plugged by a removable eraser. I still remember the smell of the eraser and the joy of spilling out all the little polished stones, their smooth surfaces, and how the light glinted off them, the feeling of the many colors and patterns, and the satisfaction, too, of putting them back. But Jim also brought me to his favorite place, the Yale Art Museum, the modern collection with artists like Robert Rauschenberg and Paul Klee below, whose compositions influenced both Delaney and Deleuze-Guattari, just by the way. I did not understand the point of these paintings, but I remembered them, especially the colors and lines. As an adult, I resaw many of these artist paintings at modern art museums and gasped in a strange recognition, a kind of joy tinged too with an odd melancholia, the memory of these enforced art trips and my childish dismissal of them. As a child, I loved the old masters section, the moody Renaissance light, the world's bringing you in, the depth of darkness. I recognized it. It called to me, like this Bruegel, the temptation of St. Anthony. But when I began creating theater pieces of my own, what did I bring into a directing class in 1985 when asked for my favorite painting? A Rauschenberg. Everyone else had chosen figurative paintings, but me, I did not realize this meant I had to create something with no obvious characters. I totally freaked out, didn't think I could do it, but then I woke up one day and had a vision of how creating primary colors as characters and bringing in the detritus of 1985 American culture along with Burroughs' Nathan Lunch. It worked, and I was hooked on a different form of creation, one that did not involve characters or narrative as a driving force, that what I later discovered had a name thanks to Thornton Wilder's description of Gertrude Stein's plays, landscape theater. In the 1970s, Robin brought me to the American Dance Festival at Connecticut College that she helped produce, and I had no idea what to make of these figures in leotards and everyday clothes, doing abstract movements and sometimes speaking, but I loved the side lighting and the colors. We always sat at the front on the balcony. Only later as an adult, when I was drawn to experimental theater by people like Richard Foreman in the Living Theater and the choreography of the Judson School, did I realize I'd probably seen some of their work back then. My memory is a lot of unnameable emotion, like a multicolored ball of translucent thread, creating something I did not understand but was unable to look away from. I was never bored. When my mother left me at Mrs. Levine's, it was because she was in New York City trying to produce some experimental sound artists and choreographers. She had a vision of a life there and wanted to include me in it, but she didn't know how. She said later that she lost all her things when she was in New York, that she knew she could not live there. She was also drinking a lot and getting high, but so were all the adults I knew. But I always had in my mind, there is this place, New York City, and that is where all the artists go to make these new colors. It had never been at that point. It was a myth, but a powerful one, like the Garden of Eden. David worked at the National Theater Institute at the O'Neill as an administrator, and we saw the work going on there as well, which then included Peter Brook's and Joseph Chaikin's Open Theater. Their various experiments would unconsciously influence my adult theater work, even though I didn't remember seeing them. But what I do remember were the performances by the National Theater of the Deaf. We all learned ASL, American Sign Language, at home, and I loved watching the actors on stage and off, talking to each other and gesture. They felt the most alive of all the adults I knew at the time, like there were rays of light coming off of them. In the 1990s, when I had a job as a nighttime legal secretary, as I walked out of Grand Central Station, everyone else was pushing to get past me and onto a train. As chaotic as this was, I loved swimming in the opposite direction of the prevailing current. In the center of the melee was a bench around which gathered a group of Black deaf teenagers who were engaged in silent animated conversation, signing to each other loudly and laughing. I looked forward to passing them every evening because they were the happiest people in Grand Central and perhaps all of Midtown. No one bumped into them. They had some kind of invisible shield around them, and I envied their clear delight in one another and sense of belonging. But seeing them gave me a sense of peace and exhale before dealing with frantic lawyers. 1972. In 1967, Amy Leddick created Benhaven in New Haven so her autistic son could have a sensory-friendly place to learn. In 1972, when the school enrolled deaf autistic students for the first time, she had the whole staff learning SL, and they discovered that sign language was popular with all the autistic kids, even those who could hear. Leddick decided it was more important the kids communicate than speak. She watched the kids speak to themselves in sign language, getting the same satisfaction from signing that speaking children get from softly talking to themselves in spoken language, another pool of light. Unfortunately, Leddick in 1991 said a facilitated communication, which now allows some nonverbal autistic people to communicate via text, we may be discovering another population because, quote, the fact they can talk about themselves means they aren't autistic because autistic people aren't self-aware, unquote. How someone so enlightened in one way could then be so blinkered in another is sad. But in 1972, anyway, she seems to have had the right instincts. 2023, 1970s. This is Manning again, quoting Delaney. The detour is necessary for the errant gesture. Once the gesture shifts into the register of the major, be it simply because it has recognized its use value, normopathic habits take hold. Quote, this is Delaney. This practice dried up. It started to languish the day we noticed that if we adorn the everyday with detours borrowed from errant lines, these very detours still have to disappear, somewhat neglected, forgotten to resume their vigor through future reunions, often due to some inadvertence. Sensing that the tracings had lost their bearing or found them, the map stopped detouring existence, which makes it clear that it's not so easy to get out of ourselves. Manning quoting Delaney. Perhaps this insight of Delaney's points to the culprit. It can be hard to avoid getting caught up in one's own concept, even if initially innovative, thereby making it impossible for new worlds to emerge that contradict one's own preconceptions. The sad irony is that for autistic adults, some of the hardest people to communicate with about our internal experiences as children and adults are the parents of autistic kids. We're sure they know what's going on with their children, even when from the vantage point of being actually autistic, we know they're wrong. Extraordinary poet and nonverbal artist Adam Wolfond writes, the ways that I think about language is through the making of it. Words are days and times and names and feelings that are cut. Please return to the calls of the atmospheres that want to write these ways of perspectives. Not only is he self-aware, he can see through the neurotypical constructs of language and narrow idea of self. And that was Manning quoting from a correspondence with him. Finding Delaney, Manning, and Wolfond is another necessary detour discovered while buried under the weight of the traumatic autism timeline and suffocated by the apocalyptic fires. A felt sense there was something else that I intuited with my free writing in Virginia that brought me back to Deleuze and Guattari unexpectedly. The quivering of the autistic divining rod leading to another understory, an aquifer to fill the well and quench the thirst, become the water. 1980, infantile autism is included independently in the DSM-3 and is no longer considered an offshoot of schizophrenia, though it needs to be diagnosed before 30 months. And because based on Leo Kanner's client pool is considered more prevalent in white boys of upper socioeconomic class. However, a new test is introduced, CARS, the Child Autism Rating Scale, which allows other groups of children to potentially be diagnosed. For the first time, a diagnostic tool includes the child's strengths. These maps, to tell the truth, do not say much, except that we in no way know what the human is, nor the common. Delaney. The first conscious detour I remember taking was in the summer of 1980 when I was 17, attending a 5-week summer program for, quote, creative youth on the campus of Wesleyan University. As with most situations I found myself in during my childhood and teen years, when in a new location, I tried on a new mask. This time it worked. I was unprecedentedly popular, perhaps because the other students like me were the weirdo artists from their schools throughout the state nominated for this program. It was basically an art geek fest. So we were all happily meeting the other outcasts and making common cause. But because of this, I was surrounded by people all the time. And even though I was happy to make connections and that my persona of sunshine, people actually called me this, caused people to like me, I began to run out of gas about halfway through. In my journal, I wrote about my schizo state at present, brought about basically by the fact that I haven't been alone for over 2 weeks and I'm used to having time alone. Also, here I'm an up person, which I love being, but which at times is extremely tiring. I don't mean that I'm forcing happiness or vibrance. It's just that by the end of the day, few, or should I say in the early morning, few, because I'm usually hyper until times like now, 2 a.m. I just need time alone. Saturday, hopefully, I'm just checking out. I don't know if it was that Saturday mentioned, but one day I did just that. For the first time in my life, I just walked away. I think we were meant to be watching some found sound thing at the concert hall, or maybe we had, but everyone was going somewhere after, and I just decided to wander off on my own. I had no idea where I was going and no goal, just a need to be alone, but somehow also to find a new path to somewhere new. I walked down a street I'd never walked that did not lead to our dorm rooms or the art center, which was the customary path, nor down to Main Street, where we sometimes went for pizza, just away. I noticed the houses in more detail, the unkempt yards with overgrown grass and trellises, the front porch with secondhand chairs and the peeling paint of college campus houses. At some point it drizzled, but that didn't deter me. I felt elated at being alone and somewhere new by myself. I don't think I walked that far, but because I had never done this before in a town I barely knew, I felt awake and alive, like I'd discovered a magical outer territory. As I was enjoying the sensation of misty rain on my skin, I saw some kind of mysterious structure, probably a small power station at the end of the road, before it seemed to turn into a thoroughfare. So I turned around and found my way back to the campus. I'm dyspraxic, which was not a thing known then, which I described as I can get lost in a cardboard box. But during this walk, I was never worried about where I was or getting lost. I somehow intuited that if I stopped looking at the signs and followed this internal prompting, I would be okay. This seems so incredibly minor in the retelling, but it was my first wander, and this experience opened the floodgates for many more literal and figurative details, feeling through the sometimes complex and ambiguous terrain of the understory instead of the paved path of achievements and awards I was meant to follow to keep up the dancing seal act. Even at 17, this was beginning to wear thin. But my life tessellated between the two realities, the compulsion to conform to these expectations and the deeper but somehow threatening desire to chuck it all and drift. The thrum throughout my childhood from my mother and his subsequent ex-wives was a warning to not be like your father. He did very little. He did not live up to his potential. He had minimum wage jobs, barely, and seemed to not care about what other people thought. He gave up on being an artist because he hated the politics and money grubbing involved in the art world. He still took photos and sometimes wrote poetry, but he didn't submit it anywhere. He just showed them to friends. He was a failure who could not pay child support, a deadbeat, a nobody, a disappointment. So anytime I felt the siren song of letting up on perfecting the shadow dance, a fear of being a nobody put on its skeleton mask and fright wig to halt the impulse, compelling me to double down on my efforts to win another award, and etc. 1980 is also when I began drinking to blackout in my senior year of boarding school whenever I did drink, which I did not do often because I was afraid of losing my scholarship. Graduating to daily drinking at college in 1981. This may seem like it would have contradicted the achievement dance, but no, it's what fueled it and made it possible to successfully navigate the social aspects necessary to create theater and be visible doing so. I wasn't weird or self-conscious anymore, just drunk and high like everyone else. Easy. But two events would bump me off the external expectation track for good, setting me on a different course, which saved my life. 3.34, or all these accomplishments may be realized in a flash of spontaneous illumination, 1987. The first event, which happened at a bus stop in San Francisco after I'd begun a recovery program to get sober, in which I was exhuming my past and taking a quote, fearless and searching moral inventory, is described in my first stage text written in 1999, Word to Your Mama. My stage texts are the closest I have to unmasked autistic texts, even though they were all written before I was diagnosed. I saw, don't say it, don't say it. I saw God while I was waiting at a bus stop for a moment, blasted out of the universe like in the last scene of 2001, faster than the speed of anything. I was shot up off the planet, saw the stars and the rest of the universe disappear rapidly behind me. Then I was outside of everything for a moment, and I was shot back as quickly as I left. My body never left the ground. At the bus stop, a mother was yelling at her son, a scene that usually disturbs me, but didn't. It all had to happen that way. I could see that, even as my thoughts said otherwise. I don't like this part of the story. And I got on the next bus. No one, not even the least, needs another man's proposed plan. Warning, where are you? A fatal exception has occurred. What has always disturbed me in retrospect about this life-changing experience, after which I never drank again, was that vying with the peace that surpasses all understanding was the abuse of the child next to me, what my whole body and soul knew my head could not believe because of this boy's obvious distress. Was this an autistic response? Because there's always the concern, if I'm going to feel this peace, it has to be true for everyone. Ethics are all. Fairness, yes. The precursor to religion, the obsession of many of us. I always thought it was just me. So while you embrace this moment and still cherish it, another part of you felt like you had to give it away, just like Mrs. Levine told you when you showed a milkshake Alan had bought you because not everyone had one. You were punished and sent to be alone in the room again for that. But nothing could remove the knowledge that I was connected to everything, not just connected, but was everything. And so was everyone and everything else, that this earth and all life was a tiny speck in the universe that was doing just fine without my worrying about it. Thank you very much. And yet somehow, and this part has never made rational sense to me, even now, I was being taken care of. A few months prior to this experience, I'd been admitted to a Ph.D. program in directing and dramaturgy at Stanford, which included a full fellowship. I felt deep down, even when applying, you should not do this, but I got in off the waiting list and told them I would attend because they only admitted 4 people a year, and I had no other prospects than working part-time at the National Lawyers Guild, where I was failing at even basic office tasks like typing more than 10 words per minute. My poor boss never seemed happier for me than when I told her I'd gotten into Stanford. I'd been nervous to tell her I was leaving so soon, but of course she was relieved she didn't have to fire my useless ass, which even I figured out fairly quickly. A win-win. Except, of course, wherever you go, that's where you are. Just a few weeks into the fall semester, I'd already run into issues in the seminars. First, there was the scenic design teacher who would not even let me look at the issue of female versus male set designers. There's no difference, he said, but can I just know? My whole application was based on looking at a female language and mythology, but oh well. Not to mention the directing class in which I'd worked with a cut-up and was accused of not creating a, quote, world. I kept saying, why can't the world be this actual room? But nope, sigh. My footnote is pro tip: in academia, people witter on incessantly about the real, but no one actually wants to be there. This is why Delaney, too, fled an institution. Okay, snarky bit. Footnote. In terms of theory, this was still in the age of semiotics. And while there was one woman auditing the drama seminar from Modern Thought who knew about the post-structuralists, I did not. So I found myself babbling somewhat incoherently about how not all things signified another thing, and what about experiences that defy description. What I was referring to was my experience a few months earlier at the bus stop. I knew I had been changed irrevocably, and I knew if I tried to explain this revelation in this seminar, I'd be treated like a crazy person. I was just proposing the possibility that there were experiences one could have that might defy words and explanation. But first, the professor was willing to consider this, but then decided to double down on semiotics and accused me of, quote, Gnostic thinking, which made her and others titter in the smug tittering way of academics. Was anyone actually tittering? I can't be sure this many years later, I admit, but even if they weren't, they were. Okay, I guess. Modern thought woman did try to speak in my defense, but at the time I did not know the French philosophers to whom she was referring, so could only look at her like the proverbial deer in the headlights and shrug helplessly. I think she was talking about Baudrillard, Derrida, and maybe even Deleuze and Guattari, but I don't remember. I just sat there frozen, knowing my lived experience was not going to be accepted here and not sure what to do about it. I hadn't even read enough William James's Varieties of Religious Experience to defend myself. I was shit out of luck, just stuck. Finally, after yet another absurd conversation about semiotics, which probably struck me as so ridiculous because they would have been discussing neurotypical gestures and facial expressions as universal, which I knew most certainly were not, even if I didn't know why, I blurted out, meaning is violence against experience. Perhaps because the statement seemed bold, the professor, a very attractive woman with an expensive short haircut, initially agreed with me, but then later on dialed it back. And again, modern thought women tried to defend me and so on. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Cevennes Mountains, Fernand Deligny is still writing, can't stop writing about the absurdity of language. There is what can be said about the turtle, and there is the tacit. He wrote these actual words. In order to make the tacit speak, what is required is to want to do violence and to violate, and not at all a secret or something that would resist being said. The turtle is not trace painted in place of what is said. There is the place of saying, and there's the other place that is not the place of saying, and that has little to do with the saying, except for what the saying actually adds to the bargain, taking advantage of the coincidence, which appears here as being represented. Of coincidence, we make confusion, for the drawing painting is literally subjugated, domesticated, and made subservient to this undertaking, of which the humans that we are not only have the secret, but long practice. What he doesn't say, we make him say, and not by torturing him, but by torturing the turtle or the skate or anything in which we want to see nothing but representation and communication. Emphasis mine. Could you articulate what you were trying to say like this? No. But did you know this? Yes. That night you were listening to a mixtape that your friend Christian had given you, which included Joni Mitchell singing, and we call for the three stimulants of the exhausted ones: artifice, brutality, and innocence. Artifice and innocence. Reagan was president. She was writing about war and also the end of the earth. She could see, anyone could see who was paying attention, but that was not a lot of people. Last night, I dreamed I saw the planet flicker. Great forests fell like buffalo. Everything got sicker. And to the bitter end, big business bickered. I discovered later that it was at Stanford they were doing the research to create the kinds of bombs she was singing about. I did not know that. But when I went to sleep, I had a dream of a man that was eating people on this calm, perfectly cured, manicured campus. People were trying to shoot him, but he would not die. He could not be killed. He just kept eating people. Also in 1987, Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus is first published in English, which is most likely the first time the English-speaking world would have heard about Deligny and his wanderlines. As Deligny says, it should be borne in mind that these lines mean nothing. It is an affair of cartography. They compose us as they compose our map. They transform themselves and may even cross over in one another. Rhizome. It is certain they have nothing to do with language. It is, on the contrary, language that must follow them. It is writing that must take sustenance from them between its own lines. It is certain they have nothing to do with the signifier, the determination of a subject by the signifier. It is certain they have nothing to do with structure, which is never occupied by anything more than points and positions, by arborescences, and which always form a closed system, precisely in order to prevent escape. Deligny invokes a common body upon which these lines are inscribed. After I woke up, I walked into the office of the head of drama and told him I was leaving. I used early sobriety as my excuse because meaning is violence against experience did not seem like it was going to cut it as a reason, but I was not lying entirely. I was leaving to save my life, to not be eaten by that man. I also did not want to become addicted to the three stimulants Joni sang about: artifice, brutality, and innocence. I didn't want to be trapped in any of them. Did I succeed? Given I arguably ended up with my first husband as a consequence, it's debatable. But I did get off that gerbil wheel, the one that had been laid out for me, even if it landed me in a different whirligig that I was not prepared for, like at all. But I did get through this swan dive into the unknown without drinking, thanks to the experience at the bus stop, impelled by an invisible thread, knowing somehow that something which would catch me, which for the record, it always has. So how, after all this, did you fall into an abusive relationship, you may wonder? It's a good question, and one best answered by the insights of John Schotter, whose work I only recently discovered 2 weeks ago during a presentation by DJ Savarese, a nonverbal autistic poet and academic who communicates via assistive technology. Savarese was urging a decentering of verbal language in a way that echoes Delaney's insights, but deepened, of course, by Savarese's own lived experience. Schotter, a psychologist philosopher who was sidelined for much of his career because of his radical insights, wrote in 1989, in our ways of talking are if our ways of talking are constrained in any way, if only certain ways of talking are considered legitimate and not others, then our understanding and apparently our experience of ourselves will be constrained also. Aspects of our experience will be rendered rationally invisible to us. We will not only be incapable of accounting for them, but incapable of perceiving and registering them as intelligible, i.e., as being one or another kind of commonplace event. And this, I maintain, is our position at the present time. We are all embedded within a dominant social order, which we must, to some extent at least, continually reproduce. I had no way of contextualizing my experience, no matter how profound. Any attempt to speak it was rationally invisible to me. I was, in essence, invisible to myself, and therefore vulnerable to being told what experience actually was by someone who positioned himself as an all-knowing man. This is beyond embarrassing now, and after I saw through him in 2001, I never thought I could forgive myself. This changed when diagnosed autistic 20 years later in 2021, and I began to understand how profoundly alienated I'd been from my own life for 57 years. The miracle is I ever got out at all. I attribute this unlikely escape to my autistic intuition, which has always guided me well when I have been able to hear it. To hear that deeper intuition requires tuning out the dominant social order, which is not an easy thing to do and always comes at a price, making it close to impossible for many people for multiple reasons, including traumatic dissociation, lack of support, class, gender, and racial inequality, and the like. In my life, however, the cost of reproducing the dominant social order has proven far more dangerous than the significant economic and social sanctions for moving outside of it. While I have very little money and a fractured so-called career as a consequence, I would not have made it to where I am now, age 60, and whole within myself, without following the understory of the Wanderlines when they became irrationally visible. The end.
Oh my God. I can't speak for everybody, of course, but I find more and more with these sessions that I am being restored to my way of being. I have about 50 things I want to say about what you just said. It would take a week of like just being in the woods somewhere to talk it all out, you know?
Let's go.
Yeah.
We're allowed to unmute. We're allowed to unmute.
Yep.
If you're speaking, you can unmute. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, can I say something?
Yeah.
I am just like so relieved and feel so freer today. You have no idea. Her story, her life trail, I close my eyes to listen to most of it, and the art she's saying, and another artist I don't know, it just lit my brain up like a light bulb. Because I want to tell you, when you see this, all of my art, if you can, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I can. It's beautiful.
And all that I've done, flowers and her pastels and her like trying to make an Indian girl and more flowers and a bird. Because I call myself like an environmentalist, but I'm not. I'm just a girl learning. And then making a little family thing with a cat and then making this, just in my home for mental health reasons in my journal, just learning art. Nobody's teaching me, praying and asking God to give me the colors and seeing nature and doing this with acrylic. Never taught, trained or anything. A college for art and more flowers and more pastels with, using Rembrandt's pastels and Van Gogh's pastels and doing nature with acrylics and learning simple stuff and keeping my mental sanity in drawing. Nobody teaching me, using art books that I've been buying, libraries, and females and colors and then making and me trying to call these me, but they're not, just parts of me. And then God teaching me. I'm so glad for your story of like things I've taught myself. Nobody taught me. Nobody's here but God in the whole room here, doing my little on the wall large map of climate change and keeping going. Even though graduating from college in 2019 and then COVID hitting, even though I'm still learning here, even though I'm being, having physical, autistic, dyslexic, but still doing mentally and the therapist coming and me doing all this art just to stay comfortable, not watching news or weather, not calling and posting, nothing. And then just keeping going, doing colors, doing watercolor, flowers, and just trying to stay mentally, emotionally healthy. What do you do? Just doing yourself, just being yourself. Beautiful. And trying to stay healthy, mentally, everything, and being quiet and blocking, hearing no evil, seeing no evil, not even thinking about war and stuff, because mentally it affects me. I would read about war and having retired military, Navy SEAL, and then Grammy and Grandpa, my daughter's family, her grandpa, grandma, Marine and Army, just trying to stay healthy and trying to pray for them and wondering what they're feeling in their 90s and 70s seeing this war. It affects me. So I just keep painting for my sanity, staying calm and relaxing and peaceful environment, loving the people in my building, just like everything you said. And I love art, so I had never heard of Delaney. So can you talk some more about how you learned of him and then how you came to rest in yourself peacefully, accepting who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I found Delaney literally through Googling, just like how I said in that thing. I was just Googling autism and Deleuze and Guattari, who were these philosophers I knew. And then I found about Delaney and I started reading. His stuff has just been, do you mind muting yourself for a sec, just so I don't hear the, yeah, thank you. And then you can unmute to say something else. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I found it, and then I found that Aaron Manning was reading about him. He's just recently been translated into English after all this time, and I just kept reading. I just found things, and then I found Aaron, and then Aaron sent me her books, and I just read and read and read all summer long. I mean, it was mind blowing because all I knew was the traumatic timeline from Neurotribes, which is a brilliant outline, and was incredibly helpful to me. But then to find out there was this dude at the same time as all the assholes creating ABA and all that stuff. I'm sorry, I'm very opinionated about that, so just don't even get me started. It's like these are the same people that created gay conversion therapy, so I'm not into it. This guy Delaney is bringing people away to just be themselves, and I just was so excited that there was somebody who had that instinct. And then I just got to know more about him, and basically the peace with myself, to be perfectly honest, came fairly quickly after my diagnosis, even though I didn't have all this information, just because everything fell into place, which for 57 years had made no fucking sense at all. And so all of a sudden it was because I've been sober for 37,000 years. I've done yoga for 20 million years. I have meditated for 30 million years. I've done all the things, and still this sense of always being somewhat off. So literally just knowing that was helpful. But luckily reading Neurotribes, which then got me into, so I basically just been following breadcrumbs is what I've been doing. And I found, then I found Nick Walker, and then I found Joanne Lindbergh, and I'd heard Catherine May even before that, just all these people that are out there that are writing and talking about all of this in a different way has contributed. And then the weirdest thing, though, and that's what was amazing about Delaney, and then finding out their relation to Deleuze and Guattari and Aaron Manning, was this whole section of my life I couldn't account for in terms of autism, which had to do with my artistic life and my philosophical life. Suddenly that made sense too. And I'm like, dude, that's what you were doing. Oh, and Authoring Autism, another great book by, Yergo, whose first name I get confused about because they changed it. But that's amazing. And so like it's just finding all of these things, yeah, and realizing that I've been making this autistic intuition. I'm trying to get at that concept, and somebody said they liked, and I was glad they did. Is this thing that's guided me my whole life without my even knowing what it was, right? And I really believe, like, I know I survived that crazy poor women who had that total breakdown because of me autistic. I don't think a regular kid could have survived that situation. I really don't. It's all the weird things you learn when you're autistic, like, how to read people in a certain way, how to do a thing, how to do a thing, how to do a thing. Like I knew how to duck and dive and weave around her, in a way that, so I didn't, get the full, and it's a miracle I survived that, really. I mean, she was terrifying. And, so there's an example, and that was one of the first reframes, right? I was talking to this therapist while I was waiting for my official diagnosis, and I realized it. We realized it together. I was like, oh my God. She's like, oh my God. And we just kind of had this moment. And the other final thing that is a lot it's not in this section, but in the others, I found finally an actually autistic therapist. So now my therapist is also autistic. And dudes, that changes everything. It's like I didn't realize how much I was masking in therapy until I wasn't masking in therapy. And then I found a whole community that was also beginning to start things. So like community with autistic adults has been honestly the most healing thing, so to find other people, a lot of whom, not surprisingly, women, not just women, but a lot of women, finding out way later, and having this weird history. So we grew up at a time when this diagnosis was so pathologized and could have led to severely negative outcomes for us had I been diagnosed. And I'm so grateful now it's different. I mean, I know it's not perfect, but my own, it's different. And I'm watching my friends who are diagnosed now with their kids coming up and realizing it. And like, these kids are going to have a whole other shot, It's just like my whole desire with writing this is to reach out to other people like me who are just realizing something, but also to change the conversation. I want this conversation to change. It's got like this residual idea that autistic people are not self-aware is just beyond belief to me. Like I can't believe anybody can say that anymore. Like how can you say that? Like what the just so that's my really long answer to your question there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Even you explaining that, and having to my own personal life, being raped, coming out of a clinic for anorexia and stuff like that, and depression, and then going to Overeaters Anonymous and trying to keep stable with eating, and then having a therapist come every Monday, and she gets to see all this art, and I just drew like a Princess Diana from memory, just starting the face in my one art book, and then remembering her whole face when she was a young girl, before she even became Princess Diana, and just the whole visual, and drew it, and it's on my phone, and I had my original, and I showed it to somebody, and the original was not in there because I took a thing and I said she was the greatest humanitarian. She wasn't racist. They ruled over a country over there. Beautiful girl, innocent girl, pure heart, pure mind, had a baby, two sons, and never violated her marriage, stayed the same her entire life, and loved all people like we're supposed to. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the, your biblical everything comes in. But she was genuine. And that was all I can remember that God showed me. This is better than your Cinderella Snow White story. This is a real life human who was chosen, handpicked, and there she is over there being genuine, being pure, a greatest humanitarian. which is our world should be like that. And, you know, sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate, and non-judgmental, and stop thinking that every created human being, baby, woman, whatever, is impure, illogical, unnecessary, unneeded as an autistic, dyslexic, you know, auditory, everything problem lady, me at 64, and creative and doing this and writing poems and staying in and staying isolated and staying safe from a world who just thinks we're unnecessary as the gifts of God in the planet of God as a creative being that your everything showed me and all the drawings and everything in your whole memoir. I love to have it. I love to buy it. But that just affirmed for me of who I am. And I'm an okay woman at 64 in my right mind. Yes, my body's breaking down. Yes, you know, with illness and disease and asthma for 64 years. Got to stay in. But I appreciate CASY and this research and Dr. Wu just revealing to me and me knowing all the speakers that that's me. I'm okay. I'm okay, even though I'm normal in a different way. I just am a thinker outside the box. And my brain won't follow your rules. My brain will say, now I can speak up for me after going to college and getting my bachelor's. But it's beautiful. I'm me. Nobody can change me. I like me the way God made me. And that's what you're saying in your memoir. And that's acceptance. Me and my skin as an thank goodness, Cherokee Indian woman from, you know, grandmother and everybody teaching me and the family how to cook and all this stuff and create and crochet and knit and all. It's all beautiful. And you showed us through your memoir that we're beautiful people, autistic or whatever. We're accepting. God accepts us as we are. It's just the world don't like us because we think outside the box, outside of their intelligence box that they're in. And God don't want us to be boxed in. He wants us to be free thinkers, creative ability, unrestrained, and then his beautified earth is displayed in all your memoir, your stuff, your art, your poems, everything, and your story. And there it is, displayed. God's glory through you, through the world. You just shared with us. And I just shared with you what I've been doing in this little apartment, safe from the atmosphere, because I have to protect my lungs. This is it. I've never been married, never been divorced, you know, had a child out of rape and had another child. They're brilliant children, billion dollars. I protected them and stayed single, never married, safe, because the world to me was not a safe place. And so I can be safe in here, not get raped. You know, I had a guy deliver my pizza. The first thing he said, "Where's your husband?" I have none. You don't have a husband? How are you living? You don't have any, you know, you have no money, you have no job. I said, well, I have disability and Social Security. But at the end, everything's paid and I'm at 000. But I'm safe. God's with me. And here I am. I'm reading. You see the art. You deliver. And then he asked me if I was having a party because I ordered like 2 weeks of food. And I'm like, no, I just have 2 weeks of food so I can get to the grocery store, you know, or order stuff online. But I'm here so it can come to me. But without your story to affirm me and confirm me and comfort me today, because I was looking for that painting, and it was just drawn. I was going to make a bigger one of it, and it's not in my pile. But you know, I just have the original picture on my phone. I send to my kids to get their opinion all the time. But thank you, and thank you for CASY, you know, the Yale program, but the research that I'm a part of this by not. I say I'm a part of it by God's divine, because to find this and be encouraged and uplifted from like being torn down mentally by constant people who are so intelligent that can't see me as an anybody valuable person. I said, okay, I'll just stay secluded, stay in, stay safe.
Can I just break in? Just
yeah, but I'm done. But that's all.
Saying
That's all.
such a joy because we never get to hear from you. So thank you so much for.
Oh, you said today. So I'm gonna mute. Yeah, I'm gonna mute now. Julia. Thank you. Thank you.
Julia is so popular. We have so many people. And if anyone else wants to jump in, but I hate cutting people off. Just know that I'm trying to get to everyone. Anybody else out there?
I guess we stunned everyone else into silence. Right?
sorry, go ahead.
I just said I was really, there were so many rhizomes going that I was like,
Yeah, I know.
but the idea of the wander, because my life went to all sorts of sort of weird places until I got where I am now and finally self-recognized last year at 59. But that one of the things you talked about was the wander, and I was thinking about how, I think that's the way we work. I think that's the way brains operate. They go in all the branches and they don't take the easy path that other people, the neurotypical people, seem to be able to make those routes very easily that other people take. And they take those routes where we take all these branches out, the way we think and the way we've lived our lives.
That's great. And I just wanted to say something quickly, Dawn, before just that I put my website in here because if people, I see a lot of people and I'm like this, or they just are still processing. If you want to contact me via that website, it's theunadaptedones.com. Named, by the way, before I knew I was autistic. Just want you to know that. Stolen from William James, my favorite dude. Yeah, anyway, Dawn, what did you want to say? Sorry.
Now about 50 more things since you started talking.
Sorry.
Oh, yes, of course. Holographic. This is how I conceptualize the way that we are in the world. And I started using that term recently, neuroholographic, because it is, you see the scans, we're lit up like Christmas trees in Vegas on the 4th of July. It goes everywhere all the time, and that is how nature works. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and I just
It was.
also wanted to mention really fast, William Stillman is one of the earliest authors that has talked about this kind of holographic experience in spiritual terms and all of that. So sorry,
Cool.
go ahead.
No, that's great. I was just going to say what amazed me that the reason I started with that, like arriving in Virginia piece, is that it was this lush, thing where just all this woods and, everything is if you've ever been, I've never been to rural Virginia. It's shockingly beautiful. And, and, and then I just started writing, right? And then this Deleuze and Guattari piece, which had never come up before when I was writing the memoir, even though it's a big part of my past. And that's what led me to Delaney and led me. So it is this, the way that the nature works. Like I'm just keying off of you, Dawn. That kind of wild, woolly thing, and the understory, which is which I got from that phrase from nature. And the rhizomes. When you start seeing it in nature, you realize why the philosophy, etc. And that also goes back to Delaney about the whole idea of the experience is what is important, and the language comes after. And what I don't have in here yet, well, it will be another chapter in my memoir, which is what one of the chapters is called "How Does It Make You Feel, Alexithymia and Its Discontents." And it's going to be about it's not that we don't know what we feel, it's there's no words for what we feel, and that's a very different thing altogether. And so that's what I'm going to be writing about, because like Delaney hurling a bunch of words at things about words, but that's what I do.
Yeah, and the other thing that I just you said too, like you were saying something about French or something. Well, what happened was I could remember French songs in school as kids, and so I'm going to learn or reactivate learning based or not beginner but intermediate French. So I got my books and bought that, and then doing and reviewing Hebrew and Greek because learning from a rabbi years ago, in Ohio, and just connecting and picking up those pieces and restoring and remembering alphabet and songs and things, French songs. But it's just like you said, we just connect like you were just doing with your hands. It's like our story is weaved together and put our mind is back together. So we are like every part of our brain lights up as we're learning. Because I'm oversensitized. I take in the whole environment. And then I got to come home and power out and sleep because I was just loving it out there in nature. Cherokee Indians, we love the air, you know, and I learned that from my grandmother. And then you come and hibernate and sleep and wake up and draw.
Yeah.
And then go to sleep for more, especially I'm a night owl, so I stay up all night drawing and then painting and waiting. By 9 or 10:30 in the morning, then I power out and sleep all day and get up and do the same thing. So I'm on a different wave night and day. But that's when it's silent, I can work and do this creative. If I'm around people and noise gets to me and I'm excited by all the kids and everything in my building, and then I come in here and I turn the fan up to high so it goes silent, then I go to sleep peacefully. But the noise, every sound, I'll be looking, oh, a bird, a squirrel, just because creatively wise, I take in the whole environment, and then I go home. I love people, and I just like take in that, and your spirit sucks it in. You go home, power out, and you get up and draw. But thank goodness for these sessions because it keeps me balanced. It helps me remember I'm a human and I'm okay, and then I deal with and learn to be that I'm safe in my home, safe with my thinking. I'm normal, only in a different intellectual way, and then I can learn to help others like me. And my grandson, he has autistic spectrum, but he has apraxia, like with language. And so I'm going to tell my daughter about this program so that she can get on and she can talk and learn more about her son. But he's intelligent, wise, smart, communication, and computer stuff where I'm tech savvy down the drain. No, even with my iPhone, having to help you guys on that side help me control stuff, you know. But I'm a mute. But thank you for letting me share. Thank you for your story, and I hope you send me a link so I can, you know, read more or get your memoir. So I appreciate it. But thank you for everything, and thank you to Dr. Wu and everybody. So, but yeah, blessings to you. Thank you for being an encourager. Thank you so much today. I'm muted. I'm listening.
Okay, great. Did you have a question? Or
I've kind of forgotten it.
I saw your hand for a brief second.
Yeah, I know, and then I took it down because there was a lot to take in. I'm not very good at taking things in that are lengthy. I have to have short bursts of things. But I did catch a few things, and I was relating throughout, I'm sure. But because we talked when I gave my testimony, we talked about that. But one of the things I wanted to say was that I think it's really important. I'm finding this in the groups now with other people who are just coming into diagnosis at late stage, to remind them that it's kind of a good thing. It's the one little nugget we can hang on to, is that having a late diagnosis is a good thing. I gave testimony to those people that were mental and still hospitalized in a mental institute all of their lives. We are fortunate because I think there's been a long period of time between what we have now for young people coming up and what we had for anyone who was diagnosed as an adult. There's still a gap in any help for anyone. So it just seems important to remind people. So I'm glad to hear other people giving that testimony of being grateful.
Yeah, for sure.
There was so much more you said that I would, love to converse with you about, but it's all like I can't even hardly talk right now because it's so much for me.
Get in touch whenever. I mean, if you don't remember my website, ask Dawn. She's got my email, or Roger. Just anybody, if you want. I mean, actually, I'll just put my email. We're all among friends. I'll put my email here. That's even easier. So there.
Well, I'm anxious to see your book in print too someday. So am I. Digest slowly. Lots of wisdom in your experiences and in your quotes. So, yeah. Good work.
I just want to mention really quickly, we had sort of tried to get this going early on in the ethnography, where underneath the announcements of people's talks, we could go back and start a conversation under that in the Autism for Connectivity for Autism, the Facebook page. I think it'd be wonderful for everybody who needs time to process, because most of us do. So,
and like I said, if somebody really wants to read it, because it is a lot. I mean, I know it was a lot. It's just, you can see why I did it that way, though, because I really wanted to make that whole connection, back in again. And I was debating. I'm like, oh my God, this is so long. But then I thought, but this is the whole thing of it. So I really appreciate you all bearing with me on that. And if you want to read it, I'm happy to send it to you, just as a draft, though, not to send to anybody else,
Okay. Yeah. Right.
We've had quite a few. I don't know. We'll talk about this at some point, but we're having a whole slew of, like, we've got 30 people interested in doing workshops, groups, sessions in the fall. I mean, it's like a huge expansion, and Roger can talk more about that. But the exciting thing is that a whole bunch of autistic mental health care professionals are joining that endeavor. And I think that that's going to, lead us into some really interesting places, because this way we deal with trauma. I came from a really abusive background as well. And I've said my autism saved me. I wouldn't be alive.
Oh, me too. I totally related to that. I have incidents so clear in my mind, and I look back on them and I think, I know that autism is what made me perform in the way I did to stay safe. It's just, it's totally amazing.
Yeah. And nobody's talked about that. I mean, I started talking about it, and I looked everywhere, and there's not even a shred of information about that anywhere. So that's why it's there, because I think it's important to look at more closely, because it's always deficit based, right? And not always, but where the superpower is like, I'm good at coding or whatever. But like, there's all the what's not talked about is the actual extreme emotional intelligence, which goes completely against every idea of what autism is. It's hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious how wrong it is. Like, and it's like, I could go on, but that's why it's there. And I really hope we pick up on that somehow, Don, in the fall, because I think it is important. I really.
Yeah, and then we have, of course, like, go ahead. No, I interrupted you. It's also exciting to hear that. No,
wait, I'll interrupt both of you.
I'll say this really briefly. It's also exciting to hear that there are autistic therapists that will be engaging, because so many are going into that field now. It's really such a wonderful relief to know that that's going to be available at some point to people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I found one.
Thanks to AANE, I found one. But yeah.
I have not. I keep finding parents of autistic children who think they know everything.
Don't get me started.
That actually brings me to the statement I was going to make, is about generational burdens, because we know that a lot of our parents were also autistic, and they, a lot of them cracked under the strain, and they functioned masked out in the world, and then they brought their toxicity home because they had nowhere else to go. And so that, we have, again, these generational burdens to talk about. And yeah, it's fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating.
Well, that's what I realized about my father. I'm sure he was autistic for a million reasons. And then my grandmother, who I lived with, his mother, who was a horrible person in a lot of ways to live with. But I realized now she was probably autistic, born in 1915. So there's no chance,
Right.
Everybody was like, why is she very different from her sister? And why is she so like this? And she was completely rigid. She was this rigid, like, and imagine, if you will, living in her living room for 2 years. That was a treat. And like, but just, I have so much compassion for her, because I'm 99.9% sure she was autistic, as much as one can be in retrospect. And I'm like, and that's why she was so freaked out by me, because she was like, oh no, so she was trying so hard to, like, I think, put me in an acceptable box, like do an ABA on me without knowing it. And I think to her son. And so, and her son lived with her his whole life, and he never could, whatever. But like, I eventually could move out of it thanks to theater. Thank you, theater. Thank you. A lot more theater kids than anyone realizes are autistic, just by the way.
I always wanted to go there. Can't speak.
Well, I'm a director. I didn't become an actor. I became a director, which is, by the way, a perfect autistic thing to do. Create your own world. Looks like you're being freaking social, but you control everything. It's great. Anyway.
Yeah, then you burn out. It would have been my mom, you know, in my life it was my mom, and I feel like I'm speaking up for her now. Yeah. You never could, and I feel such sadness for her. She suffered so much in her life, and she could never. You know, my great sadness is to see an autistic person unable to express their heart.
Yes.
Yes. But I think we're muffled in that way by society. And so I try to speak hard for her.
That's why I love that John Schotter dude that Savarese brought in. Like, I had never heard of him because he was so slightly Scottish, by the way, Don, you'd like to know. So Scottish, my entire theory is that Scottish people are autistic just in general, but anyway.
Oh, speaking of which,
See on Hulu right now is a wonderful series called Dinosaur, created by and acted by an actually autistic woman. It is hilarious and beautiful. See, anyway, just because it's like, oh my God, this whole other world where younger women can come out and be autistic and create these things. But even she has said she's so relieved to be in this series where she plays an unmasked autistic person because she spends her whole life trying to pretend she's quote normal. Like, and so she created this vehicle where she can be unmasked as a fictional character. So it's very interesting, right? This whole thing of how we create these spaces now where we're allowed to be ourselves. And I did it in theater. And I now know that's exactly what I was doing. I mean, all my theater lab experiments in retrospect, it's just hilarious. I mean, how autistic it all is in retrospect. But so I feel like that's why I brought up the artistic things that I got exposed to as a kid, because I really feel like not only art, but these experimental versions of art was the way I survived all this period of time, because it gave me a place to be who I actually am and be appreciated and criticized. But, you know, I got a PhD in it in the UK in the end, weirdly enough, like all this stuff, you know. So, yeah. So I think that's also really fascinating to look at when you're when I'm reframing my life, is the places I intuitively went to or were privileged enough. Like, honestly, like there was so much trauma in my life, but then there's this understory, and I'm just obsessed with this but then here was like, and in my life, and I don't know if this people can relate to or not, so many people that caused me the most trauma also gave me the key out. Like, it's very rarely one or the other. It's like, here, I'm going to do this, and here's your key. Because my really, really fucking abusive first husband also introduced me to Deleuze and Guattari. So, you know, I mean, it's just, it's like, oh my God, you know, how is it that this happens, that this weird paradox of life occurs? I don't know if that happens more to autistic people or that's just life. I have no idea. But
I think it does. I mean, I've thought about this. You know, the philosopher Schopenhauer says you get to a point in your life and you look back and you see this incredible arc.
yeah,
I mean, I've seen it among autistic people in ways that defy space-time. I mean, in a literal way, like you were talking about.
I think for two reasons. I think there's two reasons involved there, though. One is that we are most likely to get involved with people who do harm. I mean, we're so easily we're not manipulated, but we're so easily put in harm's way. And the second thing is that we are so intuitive and so perceptive that we are able to take that, to receive that information and turn it into something to help ourselves with.
Yeah. But I know what you mean about the space-time thing too, Don. I just wanted to quickly say, but I think we know that. We've talked about this a lot. Don and I are fairly convinced we knew each other like in ancient Britannia up in the Orkney Islands, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm pretty sure this
have
is
like,
true.
This fall, it'd be really fun to start some kind of like
physics Holography.
club, something. We'll have to think about that.
Seriously though, no, I hear you. Oh, Bill has a question.
So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about because you've talked about how you were in a very abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And you know, I share that experience. I was in actually three very abusive relationships. But I wanted to ask you, what impact did it have on your nervous system? You know, psychologically, everything. For me, I feel like it completely fried my nervous system. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, I actually have one of the chapter right before this one is about all that. So there is a whole chapter about that. It's a really long story because yes, absolutely it did that, but I feel like I came into it with a pre-fried nervous system, and in a weird way, it wasn't mine was not physically abusive, by the way. I hasten to add that. So if yours was, that adds a whole other level, and I don't know what kind of, this was more emotional. But like we had this strange relationship where I just gave him a lot of power, you know, and and he took it and he wanted it. And what happened is it's a very long story that I'm not going to try to do in one answer, but is that I did something that was hurtful to him, and then but at the same time I had started meditating, and I saw my part in it, and I realized what I needed to do. And then I started extricating myself. I had started directing his plays and letting his vision become a thing. And I realized I couldn't do that anymore. And I stopped doing that. And I started creating my own work in this play that I quoted. And then he left me, but it's because I had extricated myself from the abuse. But I think it was all because I started meditating. Like I just literally one day I got up and meditated, had a half a second of peace, and then I did it again and again and again. And I've done it literally every day since. It was 1995 when that happened. So I feel like that was a God shot, for lack of a better word. You know, it was like something came in and just boom. And it was very slow. But that changed my nervous system enough that I had enough. And I knew as I wrote the play, and I knew as the play went out into the world, I mean, this is going to end my marriage. Literally decided to leave the day I found out the play was getting published. Not a surprise. And and so I feel like the things that I had done before with the thing was that meditation piece was the thing that got underneath it. And I feel like that moment I had of whatever the hell happened at that bus stop, however you want to frame it, it just shifted something in 1987 that was still there, even though I was so out of it and kind of in a cocoon. And I was totally dissociated, by the way, just to be clear. Like I was, a friend of mine who knew me before and then after said it was like you were a head dragging around a body, and it was true. So I also started going to see a chiropractor for my hip, which also helped. It was like these little tiny chinks in the dissociated wall, right? And then my own work. And then I decided I'd do my own work. And it was terrifying. I had never written anything by myself before. When that play first came up, I literally puked my guts out the night before. I couldn't even get to the first run through. I couldn't, it was just so nutty, all the stuff around that. But somehow, and I attribute it to whatever you want to call it, the universe, a higher power, call it what you will, whatever it was, let me go through that, autistic intuition, another word for it, all of these things. It's like somehow So I don't know if that it's a really long story, and I feel like I'm just kind of answering it in circles right now, but I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it was very helpful, and thank you for giving so much detail, and that really does it makes sense, and it seems like, or it sounds like, your art and your creative expression, it was like a lifeline for your situation, and that's what
Absolutely.
like anchored you on the outside of it, so you could physically get to that place where you were wanting to go.
Which is why the abuse was so bad with him, because I let him, like this guy who didn't even know theater before I met him, I somehow let him tell me what theater was. I mean, it's like, what the fuck? So it was just like when I finally was able to get underneath that, and it's a long story how that worked, but but it was, yes, it was in the end, the theater, it was in the end, my realization I had to get back there, and the meditation that got me to the place of realizing I had to get back there, or else I was just going to keep hurting people, because, that was that. And that's the advantage of thing wherein you find a way to inventory your own behavior and see your own part in things is incredibly important, because you have to find a way to shift your own shit to get out of stuff like that, even if it's not your fault. Doesn't matter whether it's your fault, does not matter whose freaking fault it is. You have to change something to move out of those kind of situations and then not get back into them right away again.
Yeah, that's so true. And I have a second question for you. Do you feel that you had, when you were at that bus stop and you had that experience, do you feel that that was possibly an out-of-body experience?
I wouldn't, it was exactly what I described it. I don't know. I mean, I was, the best way I can describe it is I was taken, I was standing there and I was taken out of the universe and I was brought right back, and it all happened within a split second and changed my life. And I don't really know, like, I don't feel like it wasn't like I saw myself down at the bus stop. It wasn't like that. It was just something, I don't know how to describe other than the way I described it. I can only describe it. I don't know, and the effect it had, but I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. To be honest, I don't know what out of body experience means, because I'm always in my body, so I don't know how. Though I know what you mean, but I don't know if it is. So.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just curious. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions and taking your time. Thanks.
Did you have a question? You had a question for a second. There you are.
I kind of do, but I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for hours, and we probably will at some point.
Probably we will.
I love your writing so much. I love you so much, and it was a real privilege to hear so much of it. It's yeah, I loved it. I really, like somebody else said, like I just closed my eyes and was just like transported for so much of it. I think one of the things that really stood out to me from hearing your writing, even more than, I mean, I already know this about you, but I think even more having heard it today, is how much you see autism as an abundance. And as such a beautiful, positive thing to be embraced and to be encouraged and to be, just to be neuroaffirming, essentially, rather than seeing it as its limitations or the problems that it presents, whether they're problems or not, whatever. I, just for a bit of context for those who don't know me, was diagnosed last June at the age of 33. And I have really been struggling with not being consumed by my limitations and not seeing it as, like, the diagnosis was a huge relief. It was a huge relief to finally have an understanding of why certain things had always been such a struggle for me, and why I'd had certain experiences, especially with work, why it had always been such a struggle for me to work in a neurotypical way. And when I found, similar to you, when I found a community of other people with autism also in recovery, it was one of the most life-changing things that's ever happened to me. Like it's unbelievable and fills my life with so much love that just wasn't there before, and so much understanding. I guess I'm just wondering what the process was like for you first of all, whether you were at that stage of like, oh my God, there's so much that I can't do. There's so much that I can't handle. There's so much that I can't, that I just can't. And I would really love for myself to get to a place of, hold on a second, but there is so much that I can. And there are ways that I can view it in a more positive light. I'm just very much in the can't right now, and I would like to be more in the can.
Well, for me, I think this is one of the differences in it. Well, in when one gets diagnosed, because I was in my 50s, so I was by the time I got diagnosed, I was overwhelmed with this sense of what I couldn't do. At that point, before in other words, it was just like, why? After this intensive yoga retreat and my yoga teaching training, why do I still feel somewhat off? Why do I still feel off after all this therapy with this trauma therapist? Why do I still? So for me, it was the opposite, to be honest. I mean, I had like 5 minutes of what you're talking about. And then what happened was I read Neurotribes. Honestly, that just undid all of my internalized ableism. It was like the best. It was just like, oh, that's what okay. And it was just, and then I immediately had an autism friendly therapist and then an autistic therapist. And those two combined, plus my own, I think I was just ready. You know what I mean? It was just like, and then I immediately started. Then, it's just all these things. So I know a lot of people go through what you're talking about, and I do have a lot of sympathy for it. It's just, to be honest, I went through I did what I learned was I was allowed to not do things. Like, this is like, for me, I was always muscling through everything. Like, I remember like this revelation when I was talking to my first therapist, my autism friendly therapist. And I said something like, well, it's just like, I always feel like, oh, I can't get to that party and da 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 da. And she just looked at me, she's like, you don't have to go to the party. And I was like, what? Like, I honestly didn't know that was a thing. Like, I actually thought I had to get to the party and I had to do the networking so for me, it's been more, I wouldn't call it limitations as much as allowing myself to have or just giving myself some grace and space and not feeling like I have to do all this stuff. That's kind of been more, it's been, because my whole life, like I said, that like drive, don't be like your father, don't be like your father, and my mother, bless her, had no idea he was autistic, but she was really pissed off at him all the time for reasons, and she had her own stuff and yada yada. So like, that is the thing, right? So I think for me, it's like, it's a revelation I'm allowed to have limitations. Like, and that's actually a good thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just like, wait, what? I'm allowed to not have to go to that thing? I'm allowed to, and in fact, I'm more burnt out in some ways now than I ever have been, and yet somehow weirdly happier because I'm allowing it. I don't know, that makes no sense, but it's sort of like, now it's like, oh no, that sound really does make me crazy. Like, I really don't need that in my life, and I really don't want that other thing and this thing and these textures, and I'm actually going to get the right blanket. I don't know. It's just like these silly little things. But so for me, it's all been about giving myself the grace and also, being in the groups like you and I are, and hearing other people and having other people say to me sometimes when I was going through something with a neurotypical friend and said, that sounds like internalized ableism to me. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And then it was like, oh, okay, I don't have to do this thing, or I don't have to. And it was about Christmas, and it was about like, I've also got long haul COVID and all this other shit, and I can't get COVID again. So I can't let people in my house that don't take a lot of precautions. I just can't. And I was feeling so guilty because she had 2 sons and one of them's autistic, and oh my God. But she was like, well, but one of them just has a cold. Isn't that all right? I was like, no, a cold is not all right. A cold is what, made me get long haul COVID again. Like I can't. And I felt so guilty. I mean, my God, but again, it was this revelation. So I would just say it's not just so much look at the bright side as much as it's just like kind of giving grace to oneself for things you can't do. And I will add, having lived in the UK for 8 years, there is, and I grew up in New England, which is called New England for a reason. There's this real like kind of thing where you're supposed to muscle through everything and, keep just to scratch, and there's that whole thing of it. So I know that from having lived there. So I'm going to say cultural stuff is real, On the other hand, what you also have that I remember from being there is at least there's a little more social support, thank God, for people who can't get, whereas here it's just insanity.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps.
Oh my gosh, it really does. I think I forget. There are times when I am able to register the internalized ableism, and then there are other times where I don't even realize it's happening until somebody draws attention to it. And I think definitely I need to do some more reading because it's been a while since I've read. When I first was diagnosed, I was reading everything. And then it's been a while that I've been focused on other things like, the job and all of that kind of stuff, trying to like get all that sorted. And I think it's time that I spend some time with my autism and like, do some more reading and engage in a special interest and just kind of educate myself even more. I think that I have time for that now. So I think that's definitely a good shout. I've got plenty of books that I can be reading. And people that I could be speaking to, including you. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And, I also had this weird, like my year, I had a whole year while waiting for the official diagnosis where I went through a lot of these backs and forth. So by the time I got diagnosed, it took over a year. I was more than ready, you know what I mean? And so that's also a thing. And also I had that weird enforced pause that pandemia gave us, right? So I wasn't having to suddenly be in the world. I actually had this great excuse to not be in the world, which honestly, that timing could not have been better, even though I did have COVID and long COVID and ended up in the hospital. That sucked. But other than that, it was great. So, and I do know, because I do know your history, and I just think, I think taking the time is incredible. If you can, taking the time you can take is very important. And I had that time, and still have it now, kind of enforced again by long COVID, but it still is really helpful. And then I'm just working on the writing. Also writing. Okay, so this is the other thing. If you are a writer and writing makes you happy, it doesn't, maybe painting is the thing, maybe anything, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be writing. Some form of creative thing is really helpful. Like there's a wonderful quote by Joan Didion, who's one of my absolute favorite writers. And she says, I write to know what I'm thinking, and that's what I do. Like what you're reading, what I'm reading, it's not like I thought I'd write this. These are all things I was writing and discovering what I was thinking as I wrote it. And then I tried to edit it. God knows, sometimes it's like, oh my God, but I did my best. And, yeah.
I wanted to jump in and say that I mean, socially, everyone in the modern world, we don't get to learn how to say no. And some of the problems we face now are because of that. And of course, that's double, triple, quadruple true for autistic people who start getting the message from operant conditioning of whatever kind early in their lives. You cannot say no. And then we end up in these terrible, sexually exploitative situations, relationships. And then, of course, as we talked about, the burnout starts to, it's just this terrible feedback loop. So I just wanted to mention one thing that's helped me is to just say no. Like you were saying, Julia, no, I'm not going to that party. It just
Because
starts.
why would I?
Why would I? Yeah. And then that still voice inside you starts taking over and says, oh my God, I can't say no. It's liberating.
And also, though, back to the John Schotter thing that I found so helpful was that insight about how it be embedded within a dominant social order, like also the awareness of how hard that is. So again, to not get down on yourself the days you can't say no. You know, in other words, like there's so many social expectations in so many ways. And like, you know, for me, I've been lucky in that when I see a thing, I tend to see it at the time I can act on it, you know. But there have been times in my life, like when I was in that first marriage, where I knew for years I shouldn't be in that marriage and I could not move. It was like being stuck to a platform. It was just the weirdest thing. And, you know, because I would just kind of constantly go back because I had this way that life was discernible. And again, back to the autism diagnosis, it's like the way I've described it, and other people have understood this, is like, it's like you're born and you're like this, right? Here's the earth and you're on a house and it's tilted. And then it's like sobriety. I was like slightly less tilted. And then trauma work and then the yoga and but then it was like, then I got the autism. I was like, oh, and like suddenly I felt like I was on the earth, and I had not for 57 years. Even while I knew for that year waiting, I still had to wait for the official diagnosis, which I don't think people should need, but I kind of needed somehow. I don't know why I needed it, but I felt like I needed it. And it was like, also because I knew I was going to write about it, and I just really just did not want to have the argument with people about whether I was or wasn't, and I just wanted a piece of paper to shove in their face and be like, just leave me alone. Yes, I'm autistic. I don't care whether I look autistic or not to you. Like, leave me alone. So that was part of the reason. But also, it was amazing to me how much impact it had internally, because I did have a lot of imposter syndrome. And I still do. Like, even before I came to talk, I was like, well, but am I really autistic? I mean, now I actually was asking myself early this morning, am I really autistic? Like, am I allowed to talk? You know, I mean, it's amazing because there's so much bullshit that's put on us about these preconceptions about what autism is. And another book, somebody did What is Autism? I don't know if people have seen this because it's a UK book called Autistic Masking. This is an incredible book by Kieran Rose and Amy Pearson. So if you haven't read this, everybody should read this. Roger, I think you would like it a lot too. It's Understanding Identity Management and the Role of Stigma, and you can see how I read this. But it's incredible about the details of what we call masking, the difference between masking and camouflaging, and all the ways in which it works, and even the in and out groups in autistic groups themselves. So this idea that, you know, the weird, you know, how the weird gatekeeping and barriers that people put up anywhere in any groups, including autistic groups, right? And how people will then think, well, I have to, you know, ask, you know, I have to act a certain way to be in this group, you know, or whatever. Like I'm not autistic enough or something. I don't know, whatever these like weird things are. So this is really good for that. I mean, it's dense. It is some dense stuff. I'm in a book club. We actually created a little book club for this, and we took like months to read it, months literally. But highly recommend. So I just thought I'd mention that because, oh yeah, you've read it. Good. And Kieran also has a website. And the reason I read this book is he's got an incredible like hour-long presentation about masking and burnout. That's extraordinary. It's free. It's on YouTube. Yeah. So, and also, you know, he was a teacher. Also, this is of interest. I was thinking of you, because he got diagnosed, well, I think he got diagnosed younger, but then he kind of ignored it, you know, and then he kind of tried to move forward, and then he burnt out teaching, and now he does these presentations and he works more independently. He's British as well. And, you know, it's just very interesting to see the trajectory that he's gone through to find a way to work with who he is. And I think that's the main thing to get under the ableism. The ableism is us trying to fit ourselves into the world as it is, right? And the getting underneath the ableism, internalized ableism, is moving to like, no, wait, I need to be this way, and I have to find things that are that way and not keep trying to move myself this way. You know what I mean? Because if I'm spending all my time going, you know, that's like a huge amount of energy and time. And then also, though, like this is yet another sort of level, is I don't know how I'm masking half the time because I've been doing it for 57 years. So like you know, I mean, it's good. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I'll live long enough to unmask totally. I don't even know if that's a goal. I think it's more just to keep finding ways that I feel whole within myself, you know? And that's the other thing is he talks about how, you know, and Amy as well, about how the masking sometimes is what neurotypical people do too. You know, there are these places where you do mask, everyone masks. So it's not like that's something only we do, you know. But he's talking about the difference between identity management versus trauma-based masking. And that's what's also really good, making that distinction. So one thing is like, I want to look better in this social situation is identity management, or I'm masking so this person doesn't hit me is a different kind of, you know, it's like, or I don't get ostracized for the rest of my life. Like that's different. That's not, let me just be cooler in this situation.
That's a great point, Julia. We could go another couple hours, but here we are.
It's been
couple
2 hours
later. Just again, more proof that we must go on perpetually.
Yes, exactly.
So I know I have so much to think about that smoke is coming out of my ears. And this might be a good time for us to stop.
I think so. I've got to pee.
We'll say pause. Yeah,
That's going to be in the
so,
recording. Great. Perfect. Oh, this is classic.
Keeping it real.
You know, keeping it real.
Keeping it real, baby. That's
one thing you don't have to worry about with me. I think maybe now you're pretty clear on that.
Hey, we're all grounded. We're all grounded in nature here, right? So
I know exactly. But I usually will. This is the point at which I usually turn off my video and go do that. But I was like, I can't because I'm the person people are talking to. I'm like, oh my god, when does it end?
Okay, well, let's all just go take care of ourselves. Yes. Okay. Let's do that extra good today.
Yeah.
We're all proud of each other. Let's go take great care of ourselves, and we'll be back together in a couple of days for session.
Awesome.
So look for that, everyone. Look for that.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, and see you very soon.